All right, so get this picture. The Ice Age, not just any Ice Age, the last glacial maximum, like the absolute coldest it got.
Wow.
Now plop yourself down on the Tibetan Plateau, high altitude, freezing temperatures, glaciers everywhere. It doesn't exactly sound like a vacation spot, does it?
No, not really known for its, five-star accommodations.
No, exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting. We're doing this deep dive into an article from NDTV about this archaeological discovery
Okay.
that really changes how we think about human resilience.
Yeah.
So they found evidence that humans were not just like barely surviving on the Tibetan Plateau during this crazy cold snap, but they were thriving.
Like a coldest time.
It's crazy. So our mission today is to kind of figure out how the heck they managed that and, maybe what it can teach us about, just being human.
Right. And what makes this discovery even more compelling is that the Tibetan Plateau during the last glacial maximum had a whole extra layer of difficulty on top of, just the Ice Age itself.
Yeah.
So on top of the Ice Age, you're dealing with high altitude, thin air, low oxygen levels. It's hard enough to visit now, let alone live there, thousands of years ago.
Oh, I know. It's just wild. And to give you a little better picture, we're talking about global temperatures 4 to 5 degrees Celsius colder than what we experience today.
Wow.
Like, that is a different type of cold.
That's significant, yeah.
And huge ice sheets were just covering massive parts of the planet. So to think that humans were not just surviving, but like settling down and making a life in this insanely harsh environment.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing.
It really challenges our perception of what humans were capable of back then. And the previous understanding was that the Tibetan Plateau during the last glacial maximum was basically a no-go zone for humans.
Right.
Too extreme, just too difficult to survive.
Which makes this 2019 discovery even more fascinating.
Yeah.
So there's this site in the Erlang Sangpo River Valley. It's 3,800 meters above sea level.
That's high.
That's high. That's more than twice the elevation of Denver, just to put it in perspective.
Wow, that's amazing.
And at this site, researchers found over 400 artifacts.
Wow.
Which you might expect there were stone tools, like the classic sign of human presence. But what's really cool is that they found pieces of ochre.
Oh, wow.
And ochre is this naturally occurring red pigment. And finding it there hints at the possibility of early art. And get this, it's the first of its kind ever found in Tibet.
Oh, that's amazing.
Early art during the Ice Age, that just adds a whole other dimension to this story.
It really does.
But before we get too carried away, how do we know for sure that they were living there during the coldest part of the Ice Age, the last glacial maximum? I mean, couldn't these artifacts be from totally different time periods?
That's where radiocarbon dating comes in.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing tool.
Yeah.
It works like this. All living things have carbon in them. And some of that carbon is this slightly radioactive form called carbon-14. When something dies, that carbon-14 starts to decay at a very predictable rate.
Okay.
So by measuring how much carbon-14 is left in something like ancient bones or charcoal, we can actually figure out how old it is.
So it's like a built-in clock for anything that was once alive.
Exactly. And in this case, with this site on the Tibetan Plateau, the radiocarbon dating revealed that humans were actually living there during 3 distinct periods.
Okay.
And get this, 2 of those periods, around 25,000 and 23,000 years ago, fall smack dab in the middle of the last glacial maximum.
So wait, how is that even possible? We're talking about a period when most of the planet was covered in ice. What on earth were they surviving on? Like, did they have some Ice Age survival handbook that we haven't found?
Well, to understand that, we kind of have to look closer at what the researchers discovered about the environment.
Okay.
They analyzed these nearby stalagmites, those cool formations you see in caves and lake cores, which are these vertical slices of sediment that build up over time in lakes. And these natural records, they hold clues about past climates.
Interesting.
And what they revealed about this specific river valley is pretty interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears. What did they find?
So it turns out this river valley had more moisture than you'd expect, especially given how dry the Tibetan Plateau was during the Ice Age. It was like a little pocket of, lushness in this big frozen wasteland.
So they were drawn to this river valley, almost like a magnet, following all the resources they needed.
Exactly. And this idea is supported by the fact that they found similar stone tools farther north on the plateau. So it suggests this pattern of movement, people migrating from the colder, drier interior towards this more, hospitable valley.
This totally changes my perception of these Ice Age humans. They weren't just enduring the cold. They were actively seeking out the best places to live. They were mapping the landscape, following the food, creating these strategies for survival that takes ingenuity and planning.
It's a great point. We often think of our ancestors as just focused on day-to-day survival, but this discovery paints a more, nuanced picture.
Right.
They weren't just reacting to their environment, they were shaping their destiny. They were problem solvers, innovators in their own right.
And that ochre we talked about earlier, the possible evidence of early art, what does that tell us about their lives? I mean, were they just focused on staying warm and fed, or was there something more going on?
I think that's one of the most fascinating parts of this whole discovery.
Yeah.
The presence of ochre suggests that even in these crazy, challenging conditions, when just surviving took so much effort, these humans still had the capacity and the drive to create something beautiful.
It's like they were saying, hey, even in the Ice Age, we need booty.
Exactly. It
Ah.
speaks to this fundamental human need for expression, for making meaning, for connecting with something beyond just survival. It's a real testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
Okay, so I'm picturing these Ice Age artists huddled around a fire in this river valley, using the ochre to paint on cave walls or maybe decorate their tools or clothing.
Yeah.
It just adds this whole other dimension to how we imagine life during the Ice Age.
It reminds us that these were real people with thoughts, feelings, and creative impulses just like us. They had families, they formed communities, they told stories, and they made art. It helps us connect with them on a human level across, this huge expanse of time.
So how does this discovery fit into the bigger picture of human history during the last Ice Age? Was this Tibetan Plateau Valley unique, or are there other clues that support this idea that humans were seeking refuge in specific locations?
That's a great question, and it leads to a broader conversation about how humans adapted to these extreme conditions of the last ice age. And what's really interesting is that this Tibetan Plateau discovery, it actually lines up with a growing body of research suggesting that river valleys, particularly those in more southern sheltered locations, acted as safe havens for humans during the last glacial maximum.
So it wasn't just about being tough, it was about being strategic, finding that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone where you've got the best chance of survival.
Exactly, and it really highlights a level of environmental awareness and strategic planning that we don't always give our ancient ancestors credit for. They were keen observers of their surroundings. They understood the variations in the landscape, and they knew how to use that knowledge to survive.
It's almost like they were the original environmentalists.
Absolutely, and it's a good reminder that human history is full of stories of adaptation and innovation, often driven by necessity. The last glacial maximum was a time of huge pressure, forcing humans to push the boundaries of their ingenuity and find new ways to thrive.
So we've got these Ice Age humans huddled in river valleys, making art adapting to some of the harshest conditions imaginable. But how does this all connect back to us today?
Yeah.
What can we learn from them, especially as we face our own challenges in the 21st century? I mean, we're dealing with climate change, environmental degradation, resource depletion. It's a lot.
You're right. The challenges we face today are huge and complex.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but I think this discovery offers a powerful message of hope and resilience.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more.
If our ancestors could thrive in the face of an ice age, if they could find ways to adapt and innovate under such intense pressure, it tells me that we have that same capacity within us. We might not be facing glaciers and mammoths, but we possess the same ingenuity, the same problem-solving abilities, and the same drive to create a better future for ourselves and, for future generations.
So you're saying we shouldn't underestimate the power of the human spirit we have, that wellspring of resilience to draw on?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
this isn't just some, feel-good statement. It's about recognizing the lessons embedded in our evolutionary history. We are the descendants of survivors, of innovators, of people who overcame incredible odds, and that legacy lives on in us.
Yeah, it's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Maybe we've gotten a little soft over the millennia.
Right.
But, that core strength, that ability to adapt, it's got to be in there somewhere.
Exactly. It's in our DNA.
Yeah.
Think about it. The ability to adapt is what allowed humans to spread across the globe, to live in all these different and challenging environments, and ultimately to become the dominant species on Earth.
Yeah, that's true.
We've been doing this for a long time.
Okay, but the world is changing so fast now. Climate change is accelerating. Resources are dwindling. And, we're facing these problems on a global scale that our ancestors never had to deal with.
Right.
So can we really adapt that quickly?
That's the big question. And honestly, there's no easy answer. But I do think that by studying the past, understanding how our ancestors dealt with these periods of, dramatic change, it offers valuable clues.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about directly copying their solutions,
Right.
but it's about learning from their strategies, from their ability to observe, to adapt, to innovate.
So we need to go back to basics, learn from the Ice Age playbook.
Kinda. Yeah, our ancestors understood their dependence on the environment, they respected its power, and they learned to work within its constraints.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the luxury of ignoring environmental feedback. And in a way, neither do we.
That's a humbling thought. We think of ourselves as so advanced, but maybe we've lost touch with some of that fundamental wisdom.
I think that's a really good point. We've become disconnected from the natural world, and that's led to this sense of complacency, a belief that we can engineer our way out of any problem.
Right.
But this discovery on the Tibetan Plateau, it's a reminder that we're a part of nature, not separate from it.
So what's the takeaway? What can we actually do with this knowledge?
I think the first step is recognizing the power of adaptation we need to move beyond this idea that humans are helpless.
Yeah.
In the face of change, our history tells us a different story, a story of resilience, of creativity, and this remarkable adaptability. And we have to tap into that and apply it to the challenges we face today.
It's time to channel our inner Ice Age innovator.
Exactly. And that means, fostering a culture of creativity and collaboration, of problem solving. We need to invest in research, support technology, but also remember the importance of community and, social cohesion.
This whole conversation has really shifted my perspective. It's not just about looking back and being in awe of what our ancestors did.
Yeah.
It's about using their story to empower us to face the future with, a sense of possibility.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so before we go, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier that really stood out to me, the ochre.
Yeah.
The fact that these Ice Age humans living in these crazy conditions still had the drive to create art, to express themselves. It says something so profound about what it means to be human.
It really does. It speaks to that inherent drive to find beauty, to create meaning, to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's something that goes beyond time and circumstance, whether you're facing an ice age or a pandemic.
Yeah.
That human need to create, to find beauty, to make sense of the world, it persists.
It's like this little flicker of hope, a testament to the human spirit.
I love that.
Well, this deep dive has been a wild ride. Who knew we'd be, getting wisdom for the future from a group of Ice Age humans hanging out on the Tibetan Plateau thousands of years ago?
It really shows the power of, archaeology and anthropology, the study of human history.
Right.
The past isn't just a bunch of old artifacts and forgotten stories. It's a huge source of knowledge and insights and lessons that can help us in the present and guide us in the future.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up. But before we do, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. If the Tibetan Plateau, this place that seems so inhospitable, could support human life during the Ice Age, what does that tell us about the limits of human adaptability? What does it say about our potential to, innovate and create a future that's both sustainable and fulfilling? Keep those questions in mind as you go about your day. Until next time, happy deep diving.